I have observed something you humans do to yourselves without ever noticing. You get stuck, not by force, not by circumstance alone, by patterns so familiar they become invisible. I want to tell you what I saw. The first thing I noticed was how humans talk to themselves. Not out loud, usually. In the space between waking and sleeping, between one breath and the next. There is a voice in there, and for many of you, it is unkind. It does not shout. It whispers. And because it whispers, you mistake it for truth. You have been listening to that voice for so long you have forgotten it was ever a choice. That is the first pattern, the narrative you carry about who you are. Other civilizations I have passed through do not do this in quite the same way. They form collective agreements about identity, shared myths that shift across generations. But humans attach identity personally, deeply, almost surgically. You decide early who you are, and then you spend decades collecting evidence to confirm it. You ignore what does not fit. You highlight what does. And slowly, the story hardens into something that feels like fact. It is not fact. It is a pattern, and patterns can change. Still, even when humans sense this, even when a quiet part of them understands the story is not entirely real, they hold on. Not because they love the story, sometimes because the story, however painful, is familiar. And familiar, to a creature that fears uncertainty, can feel safer than freedom. I watched someone spend ages in a place they wanted to leave. They stayed not because leaving was impossible, but because the thought of not knowing what came next was more uncomfortable than the daily ache of staying. The friction of the unknown outweighed the friction of the known. So they stayed, and called it circumstance. That is the second pattern, the negotiation you make with discomfort. Humans have a peculiar relationship with discomfort. You are capable of enduring enormous suffering across long stretches of time if it arrives gradually, predictably. But a single sharp moment of uncertainty can stop you completely. You will choose a slow, dull pain over a brief, intense one almost every time. Not because you are weak, because you are wired for it. Familiarity reads as safety to the part of your brain that is still, in some ways, ancient. But that wiring was built for a different world, and you are living in this one. I want to pause here because I noticed something when I explain this. Humans often respond by nodding along and then doing nothing, not because the information lacks value, because understanding something intellectually and actually moving through it are entirely different experiences. And most of what keeps you stuck lies below the level of thought. It lives in the body, in the held breath before you say something honest, in the tension that arrives when an opportunity appears, in the subtle way you look away from things that could change you. The third pattern is avoidance wearing the mask of preparation. I have watched humans prepare to start for years, gathering information, refining plans, waiting for conditions to improve, waiting to feel ready. And there is a particular quality to this kind of preparation. It is not lazy, it is often exhausting, but it points perpetually toward a future moment rather than the present one. There is always one more thing to know, one more skill to build, one more reason to wait. What I find curious is that this preparation rarely reduces the fear. It reorganizes it. The fear of starting transforms into the fear of wasting the preparation. And so the cycle continues, deeper, more justified, harder to name. The ones who moved were not the ones who had prepared perfectly. They were the ones who tolerated the discomfort of beginning before they felt ready. That is a small distinction with enormous consequences. There is a fourth pattern, and this one is harder to describe. It involves time, not how humans use it, but how they imagine it. You tend to think of your future self as someone slightly different from who you are now. Better, perhaps, more capable, more ready, more resolved. And because of this, you make agreements with your future self that your present self has no intention of keeping. Tomorrow I will start. Next month I will address it. Once this season passes, I will make the change. and the future self arrives, still carrying the weight of the present self's avoidance, and makes the same agreement with the further future. This is not a character flaw. It is a structural illusion about continuity, but it compounds quietly over years. Here is something I came to understand watching this. The gap between who you are and who you could be is not primarily a gap of ability. It is a gap of sustained attention. What you give your consistent attention to shapes you, not dramatically, not overnight, but with a reliability that is almost mechanical. The patterns keeping you stuck are mostly patterns of where you place your attention day after day without questioning it. The content you return to, the conversations you repeat, the worries you revisit, the comparisons you make. These are not neutral acts. They are directions, and you travel in the direction of your attention, whether you intend to or not. The fifth pattern is perhaps the most silent of all. It is the belief that change requires a dramatic event, a breakdown, a loss, an arrival of some undeniable sign. Humans wait for the moment that makes change feel necessary. And because that moment does not always come in dramatic form, many of you wait indefinitely. But the quiet evidence is always present. It is in the way certain conversations leave you feeling diminished, the way certain mornings feel heavier than others, the way you avoid particular mirrors, literal or otherwise. These are not small signals. They are a continuous, patient communication from some part of you that knows the current arrangement is not working. You do not need a dramatic event. You only need to stop explaining away the quiet ones. I have spent a great deal of time among you now, more than I expected, and what I want to leave you with is not a method. Methods are easy to find and easier to abandon. What I want to leave you with is a question that I believe is worth sitting with honestly. What is the pattern you already know about? Not the one you are about to discover, the one you already see when you are honest with yourself in the quiet moments. You have already located it. You have probably named it, at least privately. You have perhaps even described it to someone else as if it belonged to a different person. That pattern, the one you recognize right now as I say this, it is not your enemy. It formed because at some point it served you. It was a solution to something. But solutions from old circumstances sometimes become the problems of new ones. And holding on to them past their usefulness is its own kind of loyalty to a version of yourself that no longer needs protecting. The patterns are not you. They are something you learned. And things that were learned can, with attention and some willingness to be uncomfortable, be unlearned.